You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Hello and welcome to GHS-TV's award-winning talk show, Crosstalk. I'm your host, Brandon Sewell. Each week, we discuss topics important to our diverse community. It is essential that when discussing history here in America, we recognize the importance and the impact of the civil rights movement. I personally would not have this opportunity to talk to you all without those who came before me. Today, we will cover some key figures to not only the civil rights movement, but to the history of African Americans here in the U.S. We'll begin our show at the Ida B. Wells Museum in Holly Springs, the only museum dedicated to this female trailblazer. You've heard of the name, but did you know she was born in Holly Springs and lived in Memphis for a few years? I sat down with Reverend Leona Harris, the executive director of the museum, to learn more about Miss Ida B. Wells. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me, Reverend Harris. So this is the only museum dedicated to Ida B. Wells in America. How did the idea for the museum come about, and how long has it been in open?
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea came about some years ago, during the 70s, and it came about as a result of my travel to Africa. I traveled to several countries in Africa and took a lot of pictures and what have you. And to make it as brief as I can, when I came back, I had to report to the university where I was attending school and to some of the high schools about my trip. They were so excited about learning something about Africa. And so that's kind of opened the door for other people who wanted to come. And they invited me to come back again. Why don't you show it each time you come home? And so I decided that I would do that. Every opportunity that I got, that I would go home and share a slideshow, because I was traveling to Africa every year. And so one of the sessions, the question was asked to me, said, what is the name of our group? We need a name. So when that question was raised up, we need a name for ourselves, then I thought about how stupid I was to make that remark, so what, I said, well, somebody else in Holly Springs don't know, might not even know who she was. And really and truly, I was just got just a little dip of her, snip of her, and didn't have no idea, nothing about her. So that's basically how it started. And everyone thought that it was a good idea that we would use her name.
So most people learn about Ida B. Wells in history class, but they don't really explore her early life. Can you tell us about her life growing up here?
Okay. Well, she had a very exciting life here. I read Ida B. Wells' book, her autobiography about her growing up in Holly Springs. Very early, I read her autobiography, and I always listened to what she had to say. She tells a story in that she said that her parents was very demanding of them. They had special responsibilities, jobs to do. And she said the major thing they had to do was to go to school. She said that she wanted them to go to school to get a good education. And Ida said, and that's what we did. That's what they set out to do. As a matter of fact, Ida was telling, in talking about her growing up here, she talked about how her father would be involved in some things that she didn't know have a clue what was going on, but she knew something was going on. She said because there were times when her mother would be walking the floor if the father wasn't home at a certain time. And so, but she said she didn't know. She said, but also there were times when her dad would come home and he would bring his company. You know, when she was a little girl, she would bring his company home with him. And she said whenever he brought his company home with him, he would always have her to read to his company. And so, so that told me from that he would read, she would read. This is a little girl, she couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years of age. You know, maybe she might have been 6. The reason I say it might have been because she said when she entered Fisher School, she didn't remember how old she was. But one thing that from reading what Ida said about her life as a little girl, that when she went to school, she was already reading.
So I read that Ida had helped form the NAACP. What can you tell us about the story behind the formation of the organization?
Well, what I can tell you is, one thing is that she was, of course, actively involved in the anti-lynching movement. And Ida was the kind of person that, from what I have read about her, when something was going on, she always liked to get in there to see what it was and how it was, and see what she could do to make it better. And I think this was one of the things she did with the NAACP. And the program and activities that she was doing was brought into the NAACP by Ida B. Wells. And that's how they, in fact, the program's still going on, because I'm sure that many of the things that she was working on in the anti-lynching movement still back in the NAACP.
So besides racism, Ida also fought for women's rights. What was she able to accomplish for women all over the country?
She was able to accomplish the most greatest thing that women in this country have, and that is the right to vote. It brings to my mind when I was in Chicago, all of my thoughts around how the life started in Chicago. But when I was in Chicago, I was taking some classes. Of course, I've already indicated that. But some of the classes I was taking was around the women's movement. And I was learning about Susan B. Anthony and Jane Stanton and this other sister that was, she was what's her name? She's a social worker. I can't think of her name right this minute. But in any case, you know, I just got sick of it. I didn't want to read or hear anything like that. But then when I read Ida's interpretation, which he had to say, it was a whole different story. And one of the things that happened there that Ida and Susan B. Anthony, from an ideological point of view, was at two different ends of the spectrum. But those two women was able to come together and make a decision on one thing that was needed. Only needed one. And that one is that the right for women to vote. White men could vote, black men could vote, but women could not vote. It was in 1913, I think that's what it was, 1913, okay? And show you how Ida and Susan would think. Susan B. Anthony told Ida to say, now when the ladies, when you talk to your ladies, make sure that you tell them that they need to march in the back, because if they march up front, they will insult the Southern white women. So they need money. So Ida said, well, she was not going to say what she told Susan B. Anthony, but they was up front to march. And that was when they was able to get the right for women to vote. And it is what we are enjoying today.
So last year, you all celebrated the 160th anniversary of Miss Wells' birth in Holly Springs. Can you tell us a little about the turnout?
Well, the turnout was excellent. It was excellent. In fact, I think that one of the lodges that we have held, and we was very excited about it. We had people from all over the country and few foreigners too. So we had a good time, and especially considering the fact that we had been shut down for, I don't know, I guess a year or so, and we had good attendance. This year, we plan, we already have been working on Adjua Wells Gala, and we plan to top the one that we just had last year.
So how can visitors and onlookers support the museum?
Oh, visitors and onlookers can support the museum in many, many ways. We have avenues where volunteers, you can volunteer, come in to help with clerical work, help bookkeeping, violence, and exhibit displays and what have you. You can do that through our website. We take PayPal, and the major vendor there is PayPal. You can become a member of the museum, and once you become a member, your membership will give you a 10% discount, in the item shop, the gift shop that we have. We have that's available for individuals and organizations that you can help support the museum.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Harris.
You're quite welcome.
Up next, we'll introduce you to a woman who helped make an impact on the civil rights movement in Memphis. Stay tuned.
Camera one, switch audio, cue talent.
So GHS-TV was started in 1982 by Frank Bluestein, the department's founder.
It's a multi-million-dollar television studio, and students who are a part of it have the opportunity to do real-world work.
Welcome to GHS Insider, the show.
What makes this program unique is the students here. We come with a lot of potential and a lot of talent, and we also come with the mindset of we have to do this, we can do this.
In this class, we really have the ability to be as creative as we want to be.
On the show today, we take you to the side. When you see yourself on a screen, it's a feeling where it's like, I actually contributed to something, I actually did something that matters to people.
We have fun days, like when we do shows and we do a really good show, it's that adrenaline of like, oh wow, we just did a really good show, we did it. Hey everyone, I'm Brooklyn White.
And there's a real sense of pride that comes from completing a show that you have written, produced, thought of on your own. And that sense of pride is really important, and it keeps us motivated because we want to do more. We want to experience that feeling again.
We're always pushing the kids, we're always challenging them, and they rise to the challenge.
So the program has absolutely changed a lot for me. It has given me a view into the arts and has let me see that I really do enjoy working behind a camera as well as in front of the camera.
The future of our program really, a lot of times, is up to the students. It's their willingness to see beyond what is here and what it can be. Year to year, it changes with the students, but the ability of the students never changes.
Go Red Devils!
For more information about the Kappa program, visit ghskappa.com or call 755-7775. You're watching the award-winning GHS-TV, a nationally recognized student television station.
Joining me now is local historian Wayne Dowdy, here to discuss the legacy of a woman named Adjua Naantaanbu. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Dowdy.
Thank you.
So, Adjua Naantaanbu, correct me if I'm wrong, grew up here in Memphis, Tennessee. Tell us a little about her time growing up.
Well, she grew up in a city that was very segregated. She grew up living in the Binghamton, in the African-American section of Binghamton, and going to Manassas High School, which was a very important local institution for African-Americans. It was an excellent school. Booker T. Washington graduates may disagree and may say that they were better than Manassas, but there was a strong rivalry there because both of them were excellent schools with great teachers, great students. And so she got an education that was far superior to most southern places. But she, she had a sense, even at an early age, of sense of justice, what is fair and what is not. And she kept up as a teenager and as a young adult with the news that was about the movement. She was certainly aware of the Supreme Court 1954 Brown decision. She was aware of the court's decisions about the Montgomery bus boycott. And she believed very strongly that she should be able to go where anybody else could go as a citizen.
So before we dive into her life and journey, I want to acknowledge her name change.
Yes.
She went by Tarlease Matthews up until just after Dr. King's assassination.
That's right.
What was the catalyst for this change?
Well, I think there were several things. One, the society in which she grew up in did not acknowledge her African heritage, which I think troubled her and a lot of African Americans during that time in particular. And she became very interested in the Afrocentric movement, which was part political but mostly cultural. And so changing her name to an African name away from a European name becomes a very important way for many African Americans during that time to celebrate their culture and their heritage. And not only changing your name, but wearing African-style clothing. The afro becomes a great symbol during that time, which is natural hair, which is something we talk about now. And she was in the forefront of that. And also trying to teach young people. Her barbershop became really a classroom for many young African Americans in Orange Mound and in Binghamton who knew nothing of their heritage. Their heritage had been stripped from them for centuries. And so her being able to, I think trying to reconnect with one's heritage is very important to every human being. And I think the racial situation, if we can call it that, between African Americans and whites, after Dr. King's murder and after the sanitation strike, I think it is natural that many African Americans would turn away from the society that killed Dr. King. And so creating their own society, I think, was very important.
I also read that Naantaanbu and a friend bypassed the grounds of the Memphis Zoo in protest without any backing of a civil rights organization. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, she felt that she had a right to go wherever she wanted to go. And she had been keeping up with the news, and she and her friend Annie Matthews thought there were no restrictions for them to go to the zoo. I'm not sure it started out as a protest as much as just two young women wanting to go to the zoo. But they're there about an hour, they walk around. In fact, they walk in, there's nobody at the gate and no one there to stop them. So they walk in like any other citizen, look at the animals. There are a few white people there who are sort of curious about and perhaps hostile, but don't take any action. And then about an hour later, some zoo officials, security guards, I think we would call them today, I'm not sure what they were called then, a couple of them with nightsticks and came up and said, "Are y'all with any children?" And they meant white children. And they said, "No." And they said, "Well, you can't be here. You can come back on Thursdays, which is Negro Visiting Day." Where whites couldn't go and only African Americans could go. That was seen as a progressive measure. Of course, it's absurd now, and should have been absurd then. But when she was forced to leave with her friend Annie Matthews, she contacted a man named Ozzie Evers, who was head of the Binghamton Civic League, very much a leader in her neighborhood. And she explained to him what had happened, and so he contacted the NAACP. They were interviewed by the Tri-State Defender, ignored by the white press. And in January of 1959, this had happened in October of '58, the NAACP filed a lawsuit on her behalf. And as a result of that lawsuit, the zoo agreed to desegregate. They were the first public institution in the city to desegregate because of Tarlese Matthews, Ms. Naantaanbu. Forgive me, I'm thinking of when she was called herself Tarlese Matthews. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. But when Ms. Naantaanbu, she got no credit for this. She was a poor person beginning her career as a barber, which by the 1950s and early 1960s did not have the same status as it did earlier. It did amongst many people in their neighborhoods, but not amongst the lawyers and the doctors and the dentists and the other professionals who were in charge of the civil rights movement at that time. And so she was not celebrated. The NAACP did support her as a test case against the zoo, and the zoo did, as I say, desegregate in a couple of months after the lawsuit was filed, but they didn't desegregate the restrooms in the restaurant. Now, how do you go to the zoo? How do you go to a public place and not be able to use a restroom? Because I got to use one every time I go to a public place. So it wasn't until a year later that a federal judge says, no, you have to desegregate the restrooms not only in the zoo, but also in the public libraries, which had also desegregated a few months after the zoo.
And that leads us to her affiliation with Dr. King.
That's right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, she was very much a follower of Dr. King and believed in his nonviolent mission. She was not a violent person. She didn't believe she didn't employ violent rhetoric even. So she was very much a follower, and she became involved very early in the sanitation strike. She is one of the first people to understand that this is not just a labor issue, this is a civil rights issue, because the majority of the sanitation workers are African American, and because they're African American, they work in very dangerous situations, poor equipment, dangerous equipment, low pay, other terrible working conditions. And so she joins very early, and she becomes a member of the strike committee. She invites the leaders into her home where they have strategy meetings. She is at every march. There is a city council meeting that they attend, which when the council abruptly walks out, they stage a sit-in, and she's there and leading songs and leading the protest. And then on April the 3rd, 1968, she is the one, with others, but it's her car, picks Dr. King up at the airport when he returns to Memphis the day before he was murdered. So, and that night, after Dr. King gives his famous mountaintop speech, Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, and others go to Tarlese Matthews, Naantaanbu's house, and they have dinner. And then he goes back to the hotel, Lorraine Motel, and of course the next day we know the tragedy unfolds, which I think had a profound effect on her, as it did every African American and others of goodwill.
So during Dr. King's last visit, a picture was taken of Naantaanbu and Dr. King strolling alongside each other at the airport. She was misidentified, as they said that it was Dorothy Cotton. What is the story behind this historic photo, and why was she misidentified in this picture?
Well, the photo just provides additional documentation of how involved she was in the strike and with Dr. King's last movement. The fact that she was misidentified is sad because she has been forgotten. And as I said, no one remembers that she integrated the Memphis Zoo. No one remembers, hardly anyone remembers, that she was involved in the strike at all. And which is a tragedy because she is an important figure, and to be lost to history and to be then misidentified as somebody else is horrible. And someone of her stature does not deserve that.
So she would also form a collaboration with David Acey,
That's right.
a very known activist, and his wife. Can you tell us what came from this collaboration?
Well, as we were saying, she was very involved in the Afrocentric movement, trying to teach young people in particular their heritage and their culture. So she collaborated with Dr. Acey and Dr. Acey's wife first to form the Celebration Africa in April, which is held every year here in Memphis and has been for decades now. And that's an outgrowth of her mission to teach African American children their African heritage, which is very important, has a profound impact on Memphis and the black community. And hopefully, to some extent, the white community as well, who also learns this history, which is also our history in the human sense. And so that becomes one of the most important parts of her outreach. And then she was also heavily involved in celebrating Kwanzaa, which is also based on African traditions. She probably was the one most responsible for bringing Kwanzaa and teaching the lessons of Kwanzaa and the celebrations of Kwanzaa in Memphis, which is still celebrated to this day.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Dowdy, for our
Yes, sir.
conversation.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it very much.
Heroes are defined as individuals who are selfless in light of a greater goal. Ida B. Wells and Adjua Naantaanbu spent years fighting against oppression and for equality. Different time periods, same objective. That being said, the fight for equality is still going on in this country. We have a long way to go, but I have hope that after hearing stories like this, we're in the right direction. For more information on our programming, please check us out on the web at GHS-TV.org, where we are streaming live 24 hours a day. You can also check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Brandon Sewell. From all of us at GHS-TV, thank you for watching Crosstalk, and I hope to see you again.